All right, today's aim. What are the methods of soil formation? The do now says describe two forms of mechanical weathering and one type of chemical weathering. We're going to talk about soil today. You do have an activity on weather and erosion. And lastly, complete any missing work by Friday. Just as a heads up, tomorrow you will have an opportunity for an extra credit assignment. I'll be talking more about that later. We also have tutoring today that runs from 2:30 till around 3:30. And yeah, so let's get started. So Grinch said, frost action is when water or snow manages to squeeze its way into cracks and rocks. It freezes, it expands, which causes the crack in the rock to grow. Beautiful. We've got plant action, same thing. Roots crack open rocks, and oxidation is when oxygen reacts with minerals, causing them to rust. Two forms of mechanical weathering: frost action, root action, oxidation. Pick the same ones. Frost action, plant action. For chemical weathering, we have oxidation and carbonation. Jocelyn said mechanical weathering is frost action, exfoliation. And we've got oxidation. Great, guys. All right, so let's start. What is soil? So soil is just a mixture of weathered bedrock and organic material, including dead plants, dead animals, leaves. Areas with little rainfall have poor soil. So when you have little rainfall, you can have little vegetation. Little vegetation means you're going to have very little animals. And if you have little animals and little vegetation, you're going to probably have less dead animals, less dead material from plants, and less soil, right? Because remember, soil comes from those decayed plants and animals. So bedrock type determines soil composition. So for example, we have limestone bedrock. We're going to have soil rich in calcite because calcite comes from limestone. It's one of the ways you can get it. Vegetation and a gentle slope keeps soil in place. So we've got two different types of soil. We've got residual soil and transported soil. Now, residual soil, basically it's soil formed from local bedrock, whereas transported soil is soil that comes from somewhere else far away and it's been moved to that new location either through wind, water, or glaciers. Now, how can you tell? If soil composition matches bedrock, it's probably going to be residual. If the soil composition is different from the bedrock, it's probably going to be transported. For example, granite bedrock with calcite soil will most likely have been transported. Why? Because calcite cannot come from granite. So here's some soil profiles. We have different horizons. Now, a horizon, just like you're probably familiar with, where the sky meets the ground or the sky meets the water, in this case, we've got a soil profile, which is just a thin strip, or maybe sometimes not so thin strip, of rock or material that when you dig a hole in the ground, has different properties from one to the next. Now, usually we tell the difference by their properties, including color and texture. So in this case, we have horizon OABC. Now, I can go much further than that. You could have 100 different layers. But in this case, you'll notice it goes in alphabetical order with the exception of the top one. Top one, the O horizon, the O stands for organics. So everything that makes up that top layer, that black, rich topsoil, that's going to be made out of organic matter. It's not actually made out of rocks. It's, for the most part, just dead plants and animals. A, B, and C are a mixture of sand and rocks and that topsoil. And here's an example of something we might find here in Brooklyn, Long Island. We have the ground at the top, and then you can see the horizon A is very dark. Not as dark as black topsoil, but it's pretty dark. Then for B, it turns like an orangey red color and it has some clay in it. And then you get to the C horizon, it's basically sand and rock chips. Here on the side of the Grand Canyon, you could see the differences in layers by color. And it's funny that they're all sand, essentially, but the different makeups of the sand itself is what dictates what it looks like. So here's our relationships. As vegetation increases, soil thickness will increase. So the more plants, the more soil. That kind of feeds on itself. So the more soil, the more plants we're going to have. As biological activity moves up, we're going to have more soil. And it makes sense. The more rabbits we have in an ecosystem, the thicker the soil is going to get. Well, why would that be? What do rabbits do? All they do is they eat and they poo. And that waste that they leave behind decomposes and turns to soil. And lastly, as slope increases, soil thickness decreases. There's not a lot of soil on the side of a cliff, right? So the more steep an angle it is, the less soil we have. So let's take a look at a couple questions here. Dark brown to black soil with high organic content, tan to orange soil with high clay, some rock fragments, and the bottom one is light gray to black soil, coarse rock fragments. So I want you to answer this one. Which two processes produced a layer of dark brown soil? Was it one, melting and solidification of magma? Two, erosion and uplifting? Three, weathering and biological activity? Or four, compaction and cementation? All right, let's take a look at the answers. Yeah, for the most part, you guys are right. Three, weathering and biological activity. So the weathering breaks down the rock, and the biological activity, the dying, decomposing plants and animals, creates that soil. Next question. Which change would cause soil layer X to increase in thickness? A decrease in slope. B, a decrease in rainfall. C, an increase in biological activity. Or D, an increase in air pressure. Take a couple minutes. All right, let's take a look. C, an increase in biological activity. Now, if you said A, and everyone moves it. Now, if you said a decrease in slope, that actually is technically true. In this case, it looks like the ground is flat, so I don't think you could really decrease the slope any more than it already is. But if it was a bit of an angle, yes, decreasing the slope would help increase soil thickness. And lastly, we've got our exit slip. Describe a real-world example of chemical weathering of an object here in Brooklyn, New York. Chemical weathering in Brooklyn. So I'll let you take a moment to answer that. While you're writing, I do want to show you today's assignment.